If I had a proper budget for this, I think how I'd like to start this review would be to actually have some kind of ritualistic, experimental maze slash magical kind of religious summoning to introduce this whole thing, and it would be using the construction of the Wasp Factory, which is inside the novel, and has its own chapter where the main character describes what it actually is. And I would place that at the beginning because I think it would really conceptualize and capture just how fucked up this book really is, I suppose. Hi, I'm McKay, and today I'm taking a look at, or we are taking a look at, The Wasp Factory. The Wasp Factory by Iain Banks. First published in 1984, The Wasp Factory comes in at around just shy of 200 pages, and it's set in an island near Portneil, I believe, that's in Scotland, and it's very much its own island. Like many of the characters are very much their own kind of characters. I would probably say that the main theme is insanity throughout it, because pretty much everyone in this is nuts in one way or another. If it's not his kind of OCD father, although he is technically his father, more on that later, who is completely obsessed with the measurement of things and actually has Frank, who is our main character, a 16-year-old boy who tells the story through his perspective. He has him memorize basically things as bizarre as the kind of cubic measure of pints that an umbrella can take and things like that, and that's how he's kind of risen him during his childhood. More a little bit about that, but in general I'm going to be speaking about the characters and how this kind of story, how it really starts to develop, I suppose. I'm not going to give it away too much, because what I found going into it without any knowledge was that my expectations were, I had very little expectations of it, apart from the fact that I knew it was very dark and quite disturbing. But that was it. I kind of made an assumption with this kind of Wasp Factory idea, that it would involve some kind of job in a factory environment, and the wasp element was probably a metaphor, something similar like Lord of the Flies, I suppose. But it wasn't really about that at all. It's actually quite a literal reference to something that Frank, who again is the main character, actually uses, and because he actually has this kind of elaborate maze that he's built, okay, and he steals wasps, or manages to capture them and forces them into this little maze, and throughout it there's just death traps basically for the wasp. And what Frank believes is that they're kind of premonitions, I suppose, and it predicts the future in his mind anyway. So whatever gruesome death the wasp will inevitably find himself suffering, that is a kind of an allusion to something in the future in Frank's life. It's kind of a religious kind of experiment. So it's kind of got a weird mixture of science and religion, and he thoroughly believes it. So more about him. He's got a half brother called Eric, who is actually registered as insane, and he lives in an asylum. I think it's in Glasgow. And at the beginning of the novel, it's revealed that he has just escaped, and he's on his way there. He keeps calling Frank throughout the piece, and Frank keeps this from his father. You'll notice as well that their relationship is very warped, to say the least. And he is insane. I mean, he went into the asylum because he kept burning dogs alive and trying to feed worms to kids and things of that nature. And again, as mentioned, pretty much all the characters in this are nuts, and there's just different levels of how you'd register it. And Frank himself actually does admit quite early on that it could have easily been him inside one of these things, because again, he is a complete sociopath. The beginning starts off with him at the sacrifice poles, because due to his kind of, I guess his upbringing, but also his kind of warped mental state, he kind of names little areas of the island, and he basically announces himself as king of this little kind of small piece of land. And he seems to be in a perpetual state of war, really, preparation for war. And like his brother, he enjoys torturing and murdering animals as well. So if that makes you a bit squirmish, and I wouldn't recommend this, to be honest, because there's quite a lot of it, especially early on. He hunts rabbits and all these kind of things, and yeah, there's basically a lot of violence towards animals throughout it, and people as well, to be fair. But the beginning really depicts the kind of mental state of this character, because he's a 16-year-old boy as well, which I should mention. So you kind of read it as a little bit of a coming-of-age tale, and as his name was Frank Caldham, I kind of thought that might have been a mild reference to Catcher in the Rye, but this is kind of Catcher in the Rye meets The Hills Have Eyes in a weird way. It's kind of like this kid is really kind of warped in his mental state, but he's highly intelligent. I'll give him that. He's very like, I don't know, he's very methodical, and he's kind of he's a sociopath that is pretty much well functioning, apart from the fact that he has no qualms about most of the stuff he's done. There seems to be no remorse whatsoever. For me, the novel did start off quite slow. I found it a little, it tested my patience a little bit at the beginning, but then oddly enough I realised that I was already halfway through it, and then I was kind of wondering, okay, so where's this really going? I know the brother's on his way back, or supposedly so anyway, and I also know that the father is equally nuts, so now I'll talk a bit about him. His name's Angus, and he never actually registered Frank's existence. There's no birth certificate, no national security number, nothing. He was a kind of hippie during his day, and for reasons I won't give or suspect, he basically decided to raise Frank on his own and not really bother with him existing in the eyes of the government. So already there's an identity issue there, which is another theme that definitely plays throughout. And so because of that as well, Frank is kind of forced to view him as an uncle more than a father, really. And whenever the kind of local policeman comes around, inevitably because of Eric doing something fucked up, burning sheep, for example, or whatever, he has an obsession with kind of burning things alive. And this policeman Diggs comes around every once in a while just to check up on things, but Frank needs to fuck off because of that, because in his eyes, he's just a kind of orphan, he's basically kind of an orphan figure who occasionally stays with his uncle because, his parents or whatever. So there's this kind of big elaborate lie. And it's also made aware that whilst Frank was being raised by this Angus character, who is his father, he would quite often lie to him about certain facts. One being that there was a character called Fellatio that was in a Shakespeare play. I can't remember which one it was now. Maybe Hamlet. I can't remember. It was or maybe one of the bigger ones. I can't remember, but one of the ones with the bigger cast. I mean, but yeah, these are kind of, and he kind of convinces him other bizarre things that make you laugh quite a bit, because it is very, very dark humoured. There's a bit where he has a battle with this kind of feral rabbit that's oversized, and he uses a catapult to kill things because his father won't buy him a gun. So there's all this kind of stuff going on. But then I found myself wondering, okay, so this is happening, but what else is really, where's this going quite a bit? And although I felt it took until at least halfway to really kind of get moving, it's enthralling. And because of the slow pace and because of the way it encapsulates this kind of area, this moody kind of Scottish Highlands where everything's kind of like still almost, yet there's a wind constantly. When there's rain, it fucking pours, and there's flooding inside the house, and there's just the descriptions of the place are kind of completely spot on. And Banks was Scottish himself, and I think he really does give you an idea of these kind of isolated areas, which I think are quite abundant. I'm not massive on Scottish geography, but I know there is quite a number of islands, and I found it quite odd that 1984, the year it was released, the book of the same name, Orwell actually went to a place in Scotland to write it whilst he was dying of tuberculosis. And although that's a loose correlation, if it is a correlation at all, I did find it quite a coincidence, I suppose, and due to the kind of horrific nature of the piece, because it is fucking horrific. Yeah, I kind of thought that there was a weird kind of like parallel there, at least. We do learn quite early on that Frank suffered an accident when he was younger that affected his genital regions, and due to that he has to go to the toilet by sitting down every time. How that came about is both horrific and suspicious, I suppose. I do, for the most part, think he's quite a reliable narrator because he's so methodical with his thinking and how he approaches things. And there is a kind of Darwinian, almost Nietzschean viewpoint that he has. He's very misogynistic. He doesn't like women at all, and he flat out tells you that he just thinks they're weak and in the shadow of men, and that all they're really here to do is give birth, while men are basically here to kill. So he has this very like survival of the fittest outlook to him. He's not exactly someone you'd really want to hang out with. He basically has no friends apart from a dwarf, which I do find beautifully ironic, to be honest. Once you get to the end of this, all the pieces start to really connect, and I found that the use of the Wasp Factory was a brilliant metaphor for how the characters were manipulated throughout, and how they manipulate as well, and how, you know, part of your fate is determined yet also within your free will. So there's a kind of, although you are within a kind of determined life script, the small amounts of freedom that you're able to kind of enact upon within it still do affect these kind of regions. So although the paths are set out, there are still multiple ways you can go down them, like a maze kind of thing. So yeah, I found it a little bit slow, but at the same time, Frank kind of just slips it in there that, oh yeah, by the way, I've killed 3 people. I don't look like I have, which annoys me a bit, but yeah, I have wasted 3 people. And then you go on to learn that they were kids, one of them being a brother, so fratricide is in there as well. And he does detail this as he goes on about how it came about, and then the reasons for it once you get to the end. And the ending is like a slap in the face, it really is, for both you, the reader, and the protagonist. And it's just like, what the fuck? You know, it's very like haunting, I would say. And since finishing it a few days ago, I've just been seeing where all the kind of connections are and the kind of puzzle pieces, how they correlated, kind of if you go down through it in a kind of pattern. It's fucking impressive. And yeah, those moments where he does mention his little murders, as he kind of seems to think of them as these, you know, it was just a phase I was going through. So he kind of just like moves on, but you know he's going to go back to it and describe it, and there's a relevance to it being mentioned. So in a way, it's a very warped, unconventional coming-of-age story that I believe is actually saying that although you might come into being and realizing who you are, if you think you can salvage yourself or find some kind of redemption, you're a fucking fool. And I do think it's got this very bleak kind of fatalism to it, really. Very harsh, and at the same time still kind of amusing a lot during it, because it's so gruesome and so like, what, you know, a lot of the time you're trying to figure out this Frank character, because he is clearly just as much as a lunatic as his brother. And I do think it is a nice parallel with him, with Eric, the older brother, coming towards the house. And you know his kind of presence is there. Little things start happening around, like dogs start going missing and stuff like that. So you kind of know that he's within the vicinity. Whilst at the same time, Frank is kind of unknowingly walking towards the reasons for how he became to be who he is. And yeah, there's just, I thought the writing was really strong in that regard. And although it is a bit slow, in my opinion, the payoff is well worth the wait. And it's something that you cannot achieve as a writer or even as a reader, to be honest, because without that initial investment in the beginning, the payoff is unachievable. And for me, probably the best part wasn't actually the ending, really, although it is satisfactory and very hard-hitting. I actually found what really kind of blew me away was the description of why Eric, is his brother, is the way that he is. And he goes into it in a chapter called What Happened to Eric. And he was basically, at one point, a very intelligent go-getter of a person, and he was really looking to break out into the world, going to university, studying to be a doctor. And then it's just like you see where it all falls apart, and it's fucking devastating. And the way it's written is so eloquent, yet haunting and suspenseful, and just, for me, the shocking element was seeing how easily it could happen to you, to be honest, and how something that you don't expect to see can probably break you. And I think maybe that was partly the message that Banks was trying to give, is that no matter how well you're brought up or you adjust yourself to the world has other things up its sleeve that can really eat away at you and basically destroy your fucking life and your sanity, really, which is a lovely message. I have noticed that I've been reviewing some really fucked up books in the last few weeks, and I'm loving it. So I'm going to be trying to continue down this path. So if you guys have any other recommendations, I'll be very glad to take them. I've already got one planned for next week, but after that, I'm running a little bit short. But yeah, I've been really enjoying these kind of looks into the kind of really depraved side of humanity recently. I'm not sure why. Probably because it is my favourite thing to read, which I don't know what it says about me. But yeah, there's something about it that really gets my juices flowing, and especially being inside the heads of these people, because first person, although it has its limitations, I do actually think it achieves an intimacy that third person can't. With a few exceptions, i.e. Crime and Punishment, you can really get into Raskolnikov's head. And as that was initially first person anyway, I think that really kind of shows, especially with the beginning part. You can kind of feel it was originally written in first person, and Dostoevsky interweaves you so well that you're in it, and you're in the manic state that he's in, and in the philosophical manner, I suppose. Maybe that's the reason I mention Crime and Punishment, because there is quite a lot of philosophy throughout the Wasp Factory, and things that really kind of get your juices flowing in that regard, and get you thinking of the world in a very, again, Darwinian kind of, but the kind of Darwinian view that I think the Nazis took, to be honest, that where it was kind of like everything's just about your genes, and it's more about killing than anything else, and seeing as the survival of the fittest as a kind of, I don't know, a motto for it's kill or be killed kind of thing. And whether or not there is a truth in that, there probably is, but you know, I do think it is mistranslating the whole idea of evolution, to be honest. I mean, I think what Darwin was really saying with that was more that that's how evolution works. It's how a species survives, is that it mutates and it you know, changes with its environment in order to survive. It's not really about, you know, slaughtering each other, as this Frank character looks into. But yeah, that's it for this. I want you to read it though, and I'd like quite a few people to do so before we can discuss, because there are a few elements that I'd like to discuss, but that would involve ruining the ending. And I think in today's age, a lot of people will be talking about elements of this story that I think are quite unwarranted and aren't really the point. But again, I can't go into that without completely destroying it. So you kind of feel like you're out of time when you're reading it as well, because of Frank's non-identity in a lot of senses. It does feel like you're kind of awash with him on this kind of isolated, disturbing kind of land where not much is really happening except for what you get up to yourself and what you can kind of manipulate, I suppose. And there are a lot of kind of Nietzschean discussions with that about his viewpoints. Say stuff like, you know, the most intelligent people will be able to manipulate their environment and the other people around them, whereas the weaker ones, or perhaps the unluckier ones, will just get, you know, have their paths set out for them, and they can't really do anything about it. So there is this very kind of Darwinian element to it. And yeah, I thoroughly recommend it. It's a little bit of a slow starter, but the payoff is well fucking worth the wait. I was kind of like, you know, jaw dropped on the floor, kind of like, what, you know, sometimes when you're reading, you get so sucked into the world, you're just kind of like left, and you look up from the page and you're kind of like sucked out of the realm and back into the world, but the world doesn't quite look the same after that. And that's what I kind of really felt with this. It's powerful stuff, really well done, and I thoroughly recommend it. So check it out when you can. I've been GC McKay, and I'll see you next week. Thank you very much. Cheers.